Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome again to our TSS lectures. And today we're going to have it in a special way delivered online for you guys. As you know, as you can see, probably if you're in the Toronto area or Southern Ontario, we're going through a major snowstorm today. And we decided that it would be safer if we all had this opportunity to join virtually today, kind of a remembrance of the days that we had not too long ago during the pandemic. But here we are again, united with our hearts connected, with our minds connected and elevated to our Master Jesus, and joined today by so many of our spiritual friends and our friends incarnated here today. So, as we usually do in our Spiritist Center, we're going to start with a reading, and then we're going to have a prayer, and right after, we're going to have a lecture by our friend Tiago, who is waiting there to give us a very interesting view on where the spirits live. And this is such an interesting topic, only not only for the ones who are starting in Spiritism and understanding where actually the spirits are, like who we are, where we are, but also for those who are really into spiritism for a while, to kind of refresh that a little bit, right? In our thoughts, our minds, and kind of understand a little bit about who we are in general, right? Um, so let's all get started. And good morning. I see Leo here saying a good morning to us, and so many people coming in here. I see. Thank you all for Jeanette for joining us. Uh, and Joyce too. She's just around the corner from us here. Thank you all, guys, for joining. So let's us get started then with our reading for today, which is going to be from the book Our Daily Bread, and this is the message called "Believe and Press On." Um, so, just as you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. Jesus, my friend. If you have embraced the Christian Spiritist task in the name of the sublime faith, thirsting for a more uplifting spiritual life, remember that the Master has sent your renewed soul to the vast field of the world in order to serve Him. You are not only to teach the way of the good, you are to act in accordance with the lofty principles that you proclaim. You are to dictate worthy directives to others, but you are to heed them as well. You are to proclaim the need of courage while sowing joy and blessings, even when you are misunderstood by all. You are not to be content with simply handing out coins and immediate relief. You are to always give a bit of yourself to whomever is in need. You are not only to forgive, you are to understand the offender, helping him or her to get up. You are not to criticize. You are to find unexpected ways to be useful. You are not to yell. You are not to make use of time in order to materialize the good thoughts that guide you. You are not to argue needlessly. You are to find a way to serve others wherever you are. And you are not to merely combat evil with words. You are to preserve the good, sharing it with everyone. You are not to condemn. You are not to discover the light of love in order to it shine in your heart until death. Pray and watch, love and wait, serve and deny yourself. If you're not willing to apply the Divine Master's lesson to your own life, your faith will have been useless. So, my dear friends, with this beautiful message that we hear today through the psychograph of Chico Xavier, let us all, at this moment, elevate our thoughts and our minds to our Master Jesus. Connect and embrace this beautiful energy that flows from our Creator into our hearts at this moment. And we ask the blessings of this meeting today, virtually, but very much connected. We ask the blessings for our speaker today, so Tiago can deliver us the message with the assistance of our spiritual friends. And maybe we allowed not only to understand as we heard today from our daily bread, but also to put in practice the words that we hear from Jesus and Allan Kardec. Thank you for the opportunity, and so be it. All right. So I'm gonna bring here Tiago, who's been waiting here for to present to us this lecture for today. Thank you, Tiago, for coming, for joining us.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, everyone who is watching us online. I'll start sharing my screen to help us understand a little bit what's going on. Bear with me for a few seconds. I believe you're all seeing this. I'm gonna put on presenter mode and let's just start. So as Marco pointed out today, our theme for today's lecture is Where Does Spirit Live? Which can be translated as what happens to us after we die, uh, which I think is a very interesting topic that society doesn't discuss as much because we live our lives as we're never going to face the destiny of death. But as we all know, death is just another process of life that we all will have to go through. But there is a lot of uncertainty of what happens to us after we die, and there is a lot of fear surrounding death as well. And about the fear of death, I went a little bit to the English literature, looking at this excerpt from the poem "The Raven" from Edgar Allan Poe, uh, where he talks very sadly and very hopelessly about death. So on this excerpt, he says, tell the soul with sorrow laden, if with a distant aiding, it shall clasp a Satan maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And you can interpret the raven here as a representation of death. and and here it's very sad and hopeless that the author thinks that he'll never seen the loved one, Lenore. So um, it's quite scary, and I think lots of people may face the fear of this unknown of never seeing their loved ones again, or even go into complete erasing of the existence. Um, but Spiritism and several other religions tell us that this can be different, although we differ in the ways that we differ in the ways in the opinions that we face the afterlife. But going back to the fear of death, we may ask, why do we fear death so much? And I think there are maybe two reasons why we have a fear of death. One is the self preservation instinct, which is something that we all have, and this is actually approached by Allan Kardec in the Spirits book, in two questions. The first question 702, where he asks, "Is the self preservation instinct a law of nature?" And the spirits reply that absolutely, all living beings possess it, regardless of their degree of intelligence. So we as humans have a self-preservation instinct. The animals also have a self-preservation instinct. And the spirits continue saying that in some it's purely mechanical, and in others it is thought out. And I think mostly in humans it's well thought out on our preservation instinct. And then on question 703, Kardec asked, what was God's purpose in granting the instinct of self preservation to all living beings? And the spirits replied that all beings must collaborate in the designs of providence. That is why God has given them the need to stay alive. Besides, life is necessary for beings to perfect themselves. They sense this instinctively without perceiving it. And I think this reply is very interesting because within a natural law, it is embodied the meaning of life as a way to perfect ourselves, to make ourselves better. And it's God putting a natural law that we must take the time that we have here to make ourselves better, to make ourselves closer to perfection by following the natural laws and by following the law of love and charity. But the other reason, I think the main reason we have a fear of death is the uncertainty about the future. And here's where in the book Heaven Hell, Kardec explores the several possibilities that have been debated throughout the history of mankind. So some people may believe that we go into nothingness, which would be the essentially the complete oblivion or complete disappearance from the existence in itself. And I will not debate as much on nothingness, but I find it interesting that in Heaven, Hell, Kardec brings us what would be the consequences if the majority of people believed in the nothingness as the afterlife. Uh, and in essence, he says that we would lose all the sense of morality because if nothing happens after we depart, what is the point of being good? And what's the point of being charitable toward our neighbor? What is the point of being righteous? And then that would bring maybe some people to not care about anything at all, to be completely regardless of someone else's fate, someone else's state of health, and someone else's well-being. We'll only be caring about ourselves and would be essentially the triumph of selfishness. So you can imagine how terrible that would be. Unfortunately, I think there's only a minority of people that are hardcore believers of nothingness. And some people who proclaim it may actually have not found anything that could explain in a logical way what happens after we depart. Kardec also comments about the possibility of absorption into the universal whole. So this theory essentially tell us that we are a part of a whole that is kind of separate of matter, but also kind of makes a part of it. And when we come to our lives, we are departed from this whole, and when we die, we go back to this whole. But essentially what this says is that we have no individuality. So it kind is better than nothingness, but it would bring to the same consequences, because if I lose my own individuality, if I lose my own self in this universal whole, then what's the point in essentially in being good and trying to be righteous if everyone is going back to that universal whole? And the universal whole also would not explain the differences that we find between each individual. That whole would be then very chaotic and very heterogeneous, and it wouldn't explain the order of the universe. So the universal whole is a theory that may be better than pure nothingness, but is also not very comforting. But where most of the religions are agreeable with is there is a preservation of the individuality of the soul. So we continue somehow to exist at another level, at another plane of existence. But to the best of my knowledge, no other religion has explored so much how the life, how this self, how this individuality continues to live on in the afterlife. Um, I think most of the people, at least in the Western world, have a concept of afterlife that was brought us from Catholic Church, and maybe a little bit of Protestantism that derive from it. So, according to that doctrine, we would have two or three destinies after we depart from our material life. If you were a person that commit very bad acts during your life, you would end up in hell. And hell is mostly depicted as this place where there is an eternal fire and souls are burning eternally without actually really burn. They essentially feel the pain of being burned, but the fire never consumes them. So it's a very horrific image. And this image, Kardec talks about it very well during the book Heaven and Hell. It comes from the concept of the pagan hell, for example, the concept of the Hades for the Greeks, with the addition that the Christian hell is more refined in the way that they torture the souls. So just to give more sense to this, in the Greek hell, in the Hades, like each person would be condemned according to their own sins. But the concept that we see in some texts about the Christian hell is that every soul, every sinner soul, is immersed in this big cauldron of fire and will be burning forever. If you were not such a bad person, but not good enough to go to heaven, you would go to this place called the purgatory, where you would be there until the end of times. And the only way that you could be rescued from purgatory is that if someone would pray for your soul, someone on earth would pray fervently for your soul to get you out from the purgatory. So you have to hope that someone liked you well enough to take you out of there, and that was a believer of the life after death. And it wouldn't matter if you regretted while on purgatory, someone had to intercede for you. So it would be a little bit of less suffering than the hell, but still suffering throughout eternity. And if you're one of the elect, one of the person that checked all the boxes, you could go to heaven, to Christian heaven. And the description that we have from Christian heaven is very interesting, where we think that the angels are there, they're playing music forever, playing harps, and you are in a constant state of contemplative beatitude. You would just be contemplating God, the angels, the saints. And although this may seem amazing, on the first day, many people would think that within 24, 48 hours, you would fall into complete boredom, because you would just be looking at the saints, which it would be great, but you would not be doing anything else. So the perspectives of the afterlife on this paradigm were not very comforting as well. But I think what we can detach from this is that uh, ever since before Christianity, we had this idea that your life on the afterlife was a consequence of your acts during your earthly life. So there was a concept of justice, although this paradigm of the Christian heaven and Christian hell had some flaws that came more into evidence while our rationality developed. Just to give an example, one would ask what would happen to children that die at an early age. Would they go directly to heaven? One may say yes, because they did not have time to sin as much. But then there would be a bias there, because like a lead time bias, as we say, because if that child had lived enough to have time to sin, then that child would have gone to hell whenever they became an adult. And we that stay here for longer, therefore we have more chances to sin. Therefore, we are at a higher risk of falling into hell. So that wouldn't make much sense from a justice point of view. So that's why many people start to question this vision of this one uh, one lifetime chance of getting your destiny in the afterlife. And that's why Kardec, again in the book Heaven and Hell, uh, brings us the penal code of the future life, obviously inspired by the spirits. And this part of the book has about 30 topics. So I didn't put all of them here, but I invite you to read because it's very interesting. But I will point out a few here. So the first one, in the spirit life, the soul or spirit suffers the consequences of all the imperfections that it could not correct during its corporeal life. And this is, I think, it's very logical and very agreeable amongst all religions that your spirit life will be a consequence of your earthly life. And he continues saying that every imperfection is at the same time a cause of suffering and a privation of blessedness. So again, it's just cause and consequence, action and reaction. If you have an imperfection, if you have something that prevents you, that is not in accord, is not in agreement with the natural laws, with the law of God, that will prevent you from reaching this state of bliss. And then he continues saying the amount of punishment is proportional to the amount of imperfection. And then this starts to differ from some concepts of the Christian hell, in which every sinner would be placed in the same space in this cauldron of fire. And Kardec here is bringing that each punishment is proportional to the amount of imperfection, which makes more sense and is just a reflection of the justice of God. If you think about it, even in human laws, we don't apply the same penalty to every crime. Every crime has a different penalty. Some people will just pay a fine, while some other people will have to spend some time in jail. And the other concept that brings us the soul bears within itself its own punishment wherever it may be, without having to be in a circumscribed place. And this is very interesting. And at that time, it was a real change of paradigm because we believed that hell was a physical place that is located in the center of the earth, where we have the caves and the lava and all the fire. So that's where we believed hell would be, while we placed heaven above the sky. Different religions like place heaven like after 7 layers above the sky. Like the Christians would usually place it like up above 3 layers, calling the third heaven. Um, so Kardec here brings that it's not a circumscribed place; it's not somewhere we can find. And when we start to explore space, then this concept of having a physical place where souls will suffer the consequences of their actions, that started to be even more challenging because we could not see the heaven that we heard so much about, neither we could find the physical space of hell. So Kardec shows here that it's not a circumscribed place. And even more interesting, it shows that the duration of the punishment depends on how much the guilty improves itself. What God requires for the end of suffering is a serious, effective improvement and an authentic return to the good. So it shows here that there's no eternal punishment. God being the expression of perfect justice, but also infinite mercifulness, will always allow his children to repent and to try again. And this is so much different than a God that was portrayed as very severe and a God that would only give you one chance of making yourself better. I see parents giving their children several chances of improvement. So it doesn't make sense that God, who is the whole expression of perfection, would not be merciful toward his own children and would not apply them the justice that is adequate for each one of them. So there is always a chance of self improvement, and whenever we repent ourselves and are willing to, there's a way to get out of the suffering and go into a righteous path. No matter how little evolved and perverse spirits may be, God never abandons them. And this is very important because we may trend to think, because of our own prejudices, that God uh, will only care about the good people. But you have to remember that Jesus came to the lost sheep, to the ones that really need it, and to rescue them. And importantly, a spirit must progress by the impulse of its own will. Uh, no one will oblige a spirit to progress unless they really want to. And it's a respect of the free will of the spirit, of the free will of oneself. And the spirit will realize that uh, they will only stop suffering whenever they want to get rid of the cause of their suffering. And continue on the spinal code, Kardec describes that some spirits are immersed in thick darkness, others find themselves in a complete isolation in space, tormented by their ignorance of the situation, as well as the fate that awaits them. The guilty suffer tortures that are the more pungent because they can see no end to them. So I'll stop here and say that we had this belief that the punishment was eternal. And some spirits do believe that because they are immersed in so much suffering and immersed in this belief that there's nowhere that they can go, that they believe that their suffering is eternal. But their suffering is only eternal for as long as they are still attached to the cause of their suffering. And once they recognize that and are willing to make a change, they will receive help. All generally endure sufferings whose intensity is relative to the evils that they practice. So each spirit is different, so they will suffer the consequences of their own acts and will not suffer the consequences of someone else's wrongdoings. The pain, necessities they cause others to suffer until repentance and the desire for reparation bring them enough tranquility to foresee the possibility of putting an end to their situation through their own efforts. So it's the will of the Spirit, the sincere will of changing, that will help them to get out of the suffering. So there are punishments in the afterlife, but there's no eternal punishments. And we are given as much opportunities we need to make a change. And I will say here that looking at the basic works of Kardec, I don't see the word umbral, but in the previous slide, I think that's what he described by the thick darkness. And maybe the first, if not the first, maybe the most famous description of the umbral came by the spirit André Luis, who wrote a series of books that were psychographed by Chico Xavier. The first of these books is called Nosso Lar, where he introduces a very detailed description of the spiritual life. And this book was actually adapted to the movie Scream, and is available on some streaming services. And this picture that you see here is one of the first scenes of the film. So the umbral, you may hear some people that are longer in spiritists saying that they have fear of going into the umbral. And it seems that we replaced our old concept of hell for the umbral, like going to the umbral as a place that is localized geographically. But the umbral, as anything in the spiritual world, is formed by, uh, I would say, the congregation, then symphony of thoughts of a certain group of spirits who are in the same tune, in the same symphony. So the umbral is described as this zone, is kind of a psychic zone, if we can put it that way, where spirits are still attached to earthly things or attached to their vices, to their pride and to their selfishness. And they, because of that heavy energy, they still find suffering in the spiritual world. So in the first few pages, in the first few chapters of Nosolar, the spirit of Andre Luis finds himself on that space, on that zone. And it's very interesting because the book starts with Andre Luis already having a conscience that he is no longer a part of Earth. He's no longer in the material world. In other words, he's aware that he discarnated, that he is a spirit, but he finds himself lost in what is described a very dark area where he sees just glimpses of light, but very shady, very grayish light. And he's tormented by spirits that are mocking him or saying names and calling him suicide. And he describes sensations of hunger and thirst and a lot of suffering. And he doesn't understand in the beginning why he found himself on that place. He even has reminiscences of reading the scriptures, and then he realized that he didn't pay much attention to them. And little by little, throughout those first pages, he realized that he wasn't really committed to make a change. He did everything for his own life, for his family, but didn't do much for the others. And that's why he understands that he was found himself on that place. So, to explain a little bit more of the umbral, um, it's not much different than what we may find on the earth. So, remember, those are groups, several groups of spirits that have the same interests, but interests in wrongdoings, in like still very immersed in selfishness. So, for example, in a city, you may find areas where most people will avoid to go because that's an area that people are very engaged into committing crimes such as murderers, drug dealers, and so on. But we also have people who do not care about other people around them. They just want to enjoy their lives, their material things. So we see those people transported into the umbral after they physically die, and they continue to have the same customs that they had while on earth. Remember that death is not a transformation of the spirit, it's just a transformation of the state. So our tendencies, our tastes, they continue. We carry them with us after we die. And when we discarnate, we will look for the people that have the same interests as us. And if we're still attached to those two material interests, that's where we find ourselves in this zone, in this space called the umbral. And that's where we will face the consequences of our actions here. To put this on a physical space, in Nosolar, it's described that the umbral is very close to the surface of the earth. But more importantly, we may connect with the umbral if we have thoughts that are aligned with those, let's say, lower interests. So it depends exclusively on us to be disconnected from it and find ourselves in a better place after we discard it. But Andre Luis brings us no hope, even if we end up finding ourselves in the umbral. One of his guides says that even in the darkness and anguish of the umbral, divine watch care is never lacking. Each spirit remains there as long as is absolutely necessary. And I will read an excerpt here from Nosular in the moment where Andre Luis is able to be rescued from the umbral. He says, "Finally, I was totally out of energy, and I felt myself completely prostrate in the mire of the earth, without enough strength to get up. It was during that bitter crisis that I implored to the supreme author of nature to reach out to me with his paternal hands. How long did my plea last? How many hours did I spend praying with hands folded like an afflicted child? I only knew that a rain of tears washed down my face, and that all my feelings focused on a pain wrought prayer. Had I been totally forgotten? Wasn't I too a child of God, even though I had never thought of knowing his sublime activities, while engulfed in the vanities of the human experience? Why wouldn't the Eternal Father forgive me when he provided nests to helpless birds and lovingly watched over the delicate flower in the wild field? One must have suffered a great deal in order to understand all the mysterious beauties of prayer. It's necessary to have no remorse, humiliation, and extreme misfortune to effectively drink the sublime elixir of hope. It was at that moment that the dense mist cleared away, and someone came forward, an envoy from heaven. A kindly old man smiled paternally at me. Then he bent down and gazed gently to my face with his big lusty eyes and said, "Courage, my son, the Lord has not forsaken you." And that's when Clarencio, like an elevated spirit from Al Solar, comes with his team to rescue Andre Luis. So, reflecting what was put by Kardec in Heaven and Hell, that when the spirit really puts himself to make a change and recognize God as the only power, that's when Andre Luis is rescued and taken to Nosolar. But what is Nosolar? Nosolar, translating direct to English, would be our home. It's a spiritual colony. And rereading Nosolar and rewatching the movie last week, I tried to make a definition of what it is. Uh, so I put this as an organized spiritual society composed by spirits who have the objective to aid and serve, guided by higher realms. And if my colleagues have better definitions, they may jump in later. But uh, what is very interesting about Nosolar is that it's very, very organized. Uh, it's a spiritual colony formed by the vibration of these spirits with the same purpose. And they organize themselves, dividing into six ministries that they call the Ministry of Regeneration, Assistance, Communication, Elucidation, Elevation, Divine Union. I will not go into detail of what each of these ministries is responsible for. I can say, however, that in most of the book, Andre Luis spends in the Ministry of Assistance because that's where the spirits from Umbral are taken to after that they are rescued. And that's also where Andre Luis starts to work after he is recovered enough from his time in the Umbral. Uh, so it's very organized, and it's we may think that it's a reflection of our material world, but actually our material world is a reflection of the spiritual world, because we also organize ourselves here in different ways. And while I was rereading this and rewatched the movie, I thought that in a very lower scale, it's kind of a spirit center. There are different spirit center that organize themselves in different ways. So there are people that are responsible for the direction of the spirit center. There are people who are responsible for the reception, for the cleaning, to take care of the library, and so on. Each one has their function, but all of those people have the same purpose. So spiritual colonies have way larger scale than this, where there are those spirits who direct the colony and who are working in the colony with the goal to aid other spirits and work for their self improvement. As you can imagine, there is no idleness there. There is work for each and every one of these spirits. So very different from the heaven that we portrayed with this contemplative beatitude. We're not going to be there if you arrive in a spiritual colony as Non Solar. We're not going to be there just looking. not doing anything. Whenever we are ready, it's very advisable that we do some sort of work. And similarly, when Andre Luis is ready enough, he starts to work in the Ministry of Assistance. Um, I want to talk a little bit about this concept of hour bonuses that being a spiritist for some time, I think it became almost like a jargon among the spiritists. So what are the hour bonuses? So this is something that was created in Ocelar. It's kind of their currency. So if you spend a number of hours working anywhere that spirit is working, those hours are counted as hour bonuses, and the spirit can use that for several purposes, like in having their own place in Nosular, or using this to benefit others, to benefit loved ones, to help other spirits. Um, so it's kind of a currency, but it's different from our earthly currency. So there is a very interesting question that Andre Luis asks in the book that, well, if a driver, for example, works X amount of hours and then the governor of Nasular works the same amount of hours, will they get the same thing? Like, it wouldn't be more fair that a more complex job as being the governor of Nasular, shouldn't that person get more hour bonuses? And then um, it's explained to Andre Luis that it doesn't work like that, because what matters is the intent of the work. So the intent of the work is not actually to get hour bonuses. The intent of the work is to improve yourself and work for the well-being, for the elevation of everyone, to work within the law of God and the teachings of Jesus. So it's way more about the intent and the dedication of that person that matters. Of course, the governor of Naslar is a more elevated spirit, so he was given that mission because he was prepared for it. But his work is not less important than someone who is driving a vehicle, for example, in Naslar. Um, and it's important to say that Nosolar is a zone of transition. It's not heaven yet, or let's put it like this: not heaven yet. It's not a perfect world. And when you see spiritists talking to each other, they say, "Oh, I want to go to Nosolar." And I think we kind of replaced heaven by Nosolar, but Nosolar is not made of perfect spirits. It's still spirits that are still imperfect, but they are in a little bit of ahead, that they are committed to self-improve themselves. But the vast majority of the spirits in that spiritual colony will actually reincarnate on Earth or in other planets and continue their spiritual journey. There are still spirits who need to reincarnate. Um, and it's important to say that Nosolar was inspired by other colonies, and it inspires the creation of new ones. So we talk about Nosolar a lot, and that's because it was the news of Nosolar were brought to us by the hands of Chico Xavier and became maybe the most famous colony among spiritists. But there are other spiritual colonies that have the same mission of helping spirits, and it's told in Ocelar that they inspired themselves in another colony, and other spirits from other colonies visit Ocelar to have some guidance and form their own colonies. The same way in a lower scale, where a spiritual center that is starting will get counsel with another spiritual center to start organizing, to start their work. So it's very interesting. It's very collaborative work and charitable work between spirits. Going back to the spirits book, Kardec asks in the question 227, 227, how do spirits learn, since it can hardly be in the same way as for us? So they say that the spirits study their past and seek ways to evolve. They watch and observe what is going on in the realms through which they pass. They listen to the discourse of enlightened individuals and the counsels of spirits who are more evolved than they are, and this provides them with ideas that they do not yet possess. So, for example, in Ocelar, there's the Ministry of the Divine Union, where they receive guidance and communication from other spirits, and they actually have lectures, they have teaching sessions where they can study and prepare themselves to continue their spiritual journey. And importantly, can a spirit progress while in the errant state? And the spirits replied that it may improve itself a great deal. It always depends on its own will and desire. However, it puts its newly acquired ideas into practice only during corporeal life. So we can learn a lot in a colony, for example, like in Nosular. Uh, we can study a lot, but we only put those teachings into practice when we come back to Earth, or we go back to another planet to reincarnate. But all those teachings and all the work that we did in that spiritual calling will aid us during our material life to help us evolve even further. And you may be wondering what happens in higher realms, higher than Nosala, for example. And I think it's very hard still for us to grasp. So I was going again through the book Heaven and Hell by Alon Kardec, and where in the part two there are examples of spirits that came back to give communications. And if you go through all those communications, I think Kardec and the group that he was working with was very interested in how is the life after death immediately after discarnation. So we have lots of examples of spirits describing their process of discarnation, but I stopped here on the example of Countess Paula, um, that was approached 12 years after she discarnated. So that communication was not so focused on the immediate time after discarnation, but how was her life after in the spiritual world. And this is within the group of the happy communications, the happy spirits. So Countess Paula says, "You are right, my friend, in thinking that I am happy." And this is because she was a very good person in life. And she says, "Actually, I am beyond anything you could imagine, despite my being still far from the highest plane." And she goes on saying, "Don't think that our happiness is exempt from changing suddenly. It's neither an unending concert, a perpetual festival, nor it is beatific contemplation for our eternity. It's movement, life, activity." So there is a lot going on in the spiritual world, in the higher realms. She describes each spirit has its mission to fulfill, wars to protect, process of nature to oversee, suffering souls to console. So here it tells us that she's talking about higher order spirits who have more difficult missions, and because they're high order, they are able to do those missions like process of nature to oversee, suffering souls to console. And she says, there is a coming and going from one world to another. So those spirits, they travel throughout space and meet, and they have no limits. They can meet in any or other world to regroup and re-strategize their missions. She says, "We meet, depart, and enjoy one another again. We assemble at a certain point and share what we have done. We congratulate each other on our successes. We consult and mutually assist one another with difficult cases. Finally, I assure you that no one has even a second in which to become bored." So if you think that we're going to the spiritual world and be just resting in eternal retirement, prepare yourself, because that's going to be way different. So to conclude, I think we can say that the conditions of the individual in the spirit world are widely variable and are related to the degree of morality and evolution of the spirit. As we have so many different people here on earth in most different situations, this is also reflected into the spiritual world, where we can find ourselves in the most different situations, and that depends only on us. Um, I think it's important to remember that help is always granted to spirits who truly repent for their wrongdoings and ask for help with sincere faith. And I think the closest example that we have, or maybe the most famous, is the example of Andre Luis when he asked for help in the umbral. There are no eternal punishments. The spirit will follow the law of progress. How fast we will progress, however, depends on our own will. It depends only on us. And I will finish this saying with this phrase by Allan Kardec that's actually written on his grave in Paris. It says, to be born, to die, to be reborn yet again, and constantly progress. That is the law. And with that, I will finish my talk for today, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thiago, for this beautiful lecture, right, about us, about what we do, right, when we discriminate. So we don't have any questions, at least in the chat for now. But I have maybe a little comment so we can talk about it. I think I really liked when you talk about Nosso Lar, which I think from my own experience too, right? When I started studying Spiritism, was like, wow, this is what almost like what heaven looks like, kind of thing. Um, but now, as you mentioned, we realize there's so much more, right? And I guess Nosso Lar is really very similar to us, right? Um, when you started to realize those points, how did you feel about it? Like, tell me a little bit about how you experienced the understanding, kind of what Nosso is, and how did it feel for you to understand that?
Well, I found it very interesting. Well, I tell how this week came by, like rereading the book, some excerpts, and watching the movie. So when I rewatched the movie, I hadn't rewatched it in a long time. I was like, oh, if for someone who is not a spiritist, this movie may seem like a fantasy movie because there's so many abstract things there. And then I got the book again, and there's in the preface, Emmanuel says, um, it doesn't matter if you don't grasp everything, but get the core of the message. It's not the exact words, but that's what I interpreted. So I said, okay, maybe I cannot grasp everything. Like there are things like the buildings that André Luiz describes that are very beautiful and seems very futuristic for us. The Airbus that we go back every now and then, which is a vehicle that elevates above the ground and then transports people throughout Nosular. Um, but I felt in the end of the day that it is it is a place that where spirits are with this goal of make themselves better. There's a lot of study. There's a lot of opportunity to work, and it's very humbling as well because André Luiz, in his past incarnation was a physician, and I am myself a physician. So he realizes there that all his knowledge of medicine was, you know, it didn't count for anything. Like not that count for nothing, but he was so proud of what he knew, and then he realized that what he knew was very little. He didn't know anything about like the spiritual medicine, and then he goes and works cleaning in the wards of the Ministry of Assistance. So I thought it was um, humbling to me as well. You know that we can always work. Every work is important, and have this consciousness that we should try to connect with um, those spiritual realms, let's say that way, like by practicing the law of God, the law of Jesus, to try to be as much as we can connected with those spirits that are there to help us.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I mean, I remember I had this feeling of like there's so much more, and I think that's one of the questions we had here from Nadia. There's actually so much more, right? That actually we don't even know. We can even grasp the concept of, for example, we have some evidence of some texts, for example, talking about other planets and how life is so immaterial in other places and how the senses work and how we it's such a different reality that it's even hard. And the spirits say, right, it's hard for us to kind of understand, like, what is this to live in, like an evolved planet, right? Like, and even in our galaxy, and then there's other galaxies with other spirits that are far more evolved than us, and then so that scale, like, we don't see the top of that scale. It's hard for us to comprehend
Mhm.
because we're still kind of the lower end of it, right? And I think that's how Nosolar is so cool in a way, because it shows stuff that we actually know. Like, it shows a bus, I think everybody says, oh, that's a bus. It just flies, but it's kind of weird, but it's a bus. I guess because at some point we're going to say, well, what are you guys talking about?
Mhm.
You can just think about a place and be there
Yeah.
and be one with it. And they were like, okay, I don't get that idea. Like,
Yeah. We have to remember that Nosolar, I think, was released in the 1940s.
yeah,
So, like, the concept of a flying bus was
yeah,
very abstract, but today,
right.
like, we have electromagnetists that
Exactly.
helps
Yeah,
us. So,
yeah.
we understand better.
That's a great point. So I
Yeah.
think just one question from Nadia here is like, what word will be after Nosolar? And I think to help Nadia understand, yeah, Nosolar is still here. Like, it's still pretty much us, right? In the same kind of plane of living, right? It's just it's around one of our cities, right? Rio, and there's other cities that have other spiritual cities related to them, and it's so close to us. We still have structure, ministry, we have still food, we have like a very earth-like existence in those cities that are described, because that's kind of who we are the spirits there. So you can imagine that transition, right, Nadia? But now, if you think about what else is beyond that, I mean, I think there's an enormous road above that, of places that are so inherently different from what we understand that it's even hard for us to comprehend. But in principle, what we see as we evolve is that material things become less and less important and relevant. So, in other words, whatever you think about material imagery around you, your house, your car, your clothes, like any of that, like, becomes completely irrelevant, right? And then your spiritual body becomes less and less materialized, right? Or less needed, right? Because you don't need to interact much with matter as we see it, right? And then things become a lot more fluent, and you start to interact directly by thoughts, and being places by just projecting your thoughts in those places. So, in other words, everything becomes a lot more difficult to comprehend compared to our physical world. So I think that's why Nasla is nice, as Tiago mentioned, because it's still kind of something we can understand, right? And it's still close to us, right?
Yeah.
But actually very close to us, right?
Yeah.
There's another question here, Tiago, from Marilia Silveira, asking, in your opinion, how can we get prepared for what is waiting for us? I think that's a great question, Tiago.
It's a great question. I think the best way to get prepared is remember the high commandment, love God above all things and love thy neighbor as yourself. As Jesus said, this is summarizes all the law and the prophets. And if you practice this as much as you can in your core, that's how you better prepare for what is after death. If you practice this, you connect to like spirits in the same with the same vibration, and that's where you find yourself after discarnate. You're gonna find help there with those spirits.
Yeah, excellent, Tiago. I mean, I think, and Marilia, and I think Tiago summarized it so well. And if you think about everything, and so we in Spiritism and other religions, and everywhere we go, we tend to overthink things a lot. I don't know if you notice that, but it happens with me all the time, right? And realistically speaking, the message from Jesus is so straightforward, right? That if you actually think about that, then you don't have to worry about anything else. It's almost like you don't have to worry about a lot of things. Basically, you have to worry about, like, who are you? Like, what are we doing? Can we actually deal with our own issues, like, now, and start working on it, and think about how can we be better, how can we improve ourselves, how can we help others by doing that? Like, if you work on those basic concepts, right, from Jesus on a day to day, then automatically, right, you'll be in a state, like in a state of mind that you're going to be leaving the surrounding where your mind is, right? That's really what the this created world is, right? Obviously, if you have troubled thoughts and your vibration is not that well, and you kind of connected to some negativity, then you'll be surrounded by it, right? And I think that's as simple as that. Really, there's nothing too complicated about it. Obviously, we can make it complicated by trying to incorporate some concepts of Andrea Luiz brings to us about the evolution of two worlds and how magnetism and energies and interactions between spiritual plane, but that is not relevant, right? Like the real message is, as Tiago says really well. So just love, love your neighbors and love yourself, and kind of work on that, right? So that's what we need to do, and that's a day to day thing. It's not like a transition thing. Like it's like work on it, right? So there's another question by Victoria, and Tiago. That's what about the spirits that remain on Earth, right?
Yeah, I think I don't know if Tori's talking about like what we call ghosts or poltergeists, but the spirits who remain on Earth, I would say they're actually spirits who are in the zone of the umbral, because the umbral are this group of spirits that vibrate with the earthly things, very attached to the earthly things. So I say that those spirits that we say remain on earth are spirits that are actually in the umbral. And in Nosolar, I think it's Elysius, one of the guides of Andrea Luisi, says that geographically the umbral is very close to the surface of the earth, but that is probably because those spirits are so attached to their earthly existence, to their earthly vices, that they cannot detach and they stay there. And I will add that we often talk about the spiritual world, material world, but it's actually all the same thing. There's no wall. It's all the different states of matter, and we interact with each other 24/7, and we don't realize. So every time you have like a thought is sort of is a type of energy, and you connect that energy with spirits that are vibrating on that same frequency.
Oh, that's so important, Thiago. That's so true that, we're constantly interacting in its two-way communication with the spiritual world, which is coexistent with our world. And Victoria, and think about that. If you there's about a 3-to-1 ratio of discarnate spirits to incarnate spirits estimated in our planet. I'm not sure if that's valid for every planet, but in our planet, for sure, that's what we think it is based on the communications we receive. So, which means that, if we have like 7 billion people incarnated currently today, we're going to have, like what, 21 billion spirits related to us in different levels, stages. And it's such a diverse community in a way. And that is kind of the beauty of it, because it interacts and allows the community to grow and to kind of help each other. Because I always think about this, like, what if we're all of a sudden in this beautiful world that there's no challenges and no issues, right? And then how could we actually progress? How can we learn to help, and to deal with challenges and to learn from the others if we're not in a world where those problems still exist? That's why we are in this planet, right? There's always a reason for things, and that the reason is to for us to help each other and progress. And that means also that, even like in worlds nowadays, for example, when you're projecting negativity, when we're projecting thoughts that are not positive to the universe, we actually help create that type of negativity that creates the umbrals, right? So in other words, we're contributing to those thoughts, the collective thoughts. So our responsibility is so, it's like we're living in a big house with a big family, right? We have these different rooms in the house, we have different dynamics, right? But we all have to stay together as a family, right? We move together as a family. And if you take the big picture of our planet and moving toward a household, that's kind of what it is, right? Everyone has roles, everyone has responsibilities, everyone has duties, right? And that's the same. If you move that into entire universe, that's the same thing. So there's many houses in the universe in our Father's kingdom, as Jesus said, and everyone has its own stages of evolution and helping each other and responsibilities, right? So from the microcosmos to the macrocosmos, I think we're all kind of related in that way. Uh, and I think I have one more question here. Oh, and this is from Leo. So Leo's asking, can we talk about the postage auxiliary and the other colonies? Yeah. So that's a great point, Leo, because we can get, for example, from the book Workers of Life Eternal, right? From André Luiz and Chico. I think that's a great example because it talks about the Casa Transitoria Fabiano, right? And what it is this spiritual outpost, right? That exists in the spiritual world. And I think this idea is sometimes seen very complicated by many people, but it's actually a very straight. Like if we use the same principles we're talking about, if you think about that, if spirits who are discarnating are so connected to matter that they still think they're alive, so the imagery for those spirits has to be related to reality, us, right? So in other words, they will see a building, right? They will see walls. They'll be scared of lights and guns and explosions and everything that provides fear and makes us feel scared as incarnates. It will be the same for those discarnates because they're still so tightly connected to their earthly experiences. So, therefore, in some spiritual cities, there are these outposts that are going to go into the deeper ends of the umbrals, right? And they will be there to basically help out spirits that are ready to move on, right? And at the same time they have to somehow protect themselves, let's put it this way, from the influence of those spirits around them, and sometimes using imageries that are really earthly, right? And I think that the Casa Transitoria is a great example, right? Because they talk about the defenses, right? They have defenses and stun guns, and they have this abysses and things that are very imagery instigating, right? Of but in reality, that is all like a mental projection, right? To create an environment for those spirits that they kind of feel and recognize as their own level of understanding, right? What I'm trying to say is like if you imagine if you're in the umbral and Andrea Luiz says that in his story, which I find in a minute, they have to dim their lights, right? It's so interesting because they have to adapt, right, to the environment, right? In the same way that if you go to Jupiter, where other spirits are super evolved and present, you don't have any physical imagery, right? It's all light and music, as they like to say, right? So, such an interesting concept.
I will add to that that for this type of work, like there it has to be a very well prepared spirit. And again, also like Andrea Luis just came out as a doctor in the past incarnation, says, "Oh, I would like to help in this type of work." And then his guide says, you really think you're ready yet?" Like saying, like, not yet, because it's that concept, like you want to help you, but have to prepare yourself, and it's a very hard work that these spirits do. And in one point during the book, they are preparing to receive a large amount of spirits, and it's kind of working in a ER. They communicate with the main host and say, we need backup. We need more people here to help because we're bringing X amount of spirits that really need help. So it's a lot of work, and are very well prepared spirits, and um, you need to study a lot, and it's a work of self denial, a lot of self denial and love towards someone else.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, it's a nice imagery of the hospital there, right? Which
Yeah.
is really like one of the pillars of spiritism, right? As a hospital, as a school, right? As this religious center where we combine everything philosophically, scientifically, right? So thank you very much, Thiago. So we're coming to the end of our lecture today. So I'd like again to thank Thiago for this beautiful lecture today, and we'll see each other soon, Thiago. So thank you so much. I'm gonna move back to stage. There you go. So for everyone that is still here with us. So we had over 20 people with us live all the time today, which I really, really appreciate you guys all joining us in this super snowy day. Thank you so much. I hope you all guys stay warm and safe. We're going to have a quick prayer as we normally do at the end. Um, so I want you guys to keep this incredible imageries of in your minds of Jesus and all the different houses in the universe of our God, our Creator, Father, Mother, God. So let us all connect to that energy and feel our hearts at this moment. Let us feel these beautiful lights as they feel the places where we are right now and connect to every single part of our bodies. Let us project that into our surroundings, to the people in our families and our households. Let us project that into the cities and the countries and the communities that we live. And let us project this an entire world and a universe as these beams of light that provide that connection that allow us to move on together. So I would like to thank our Master Jesus, our Father, Mother God, for the opportunities that we had today. I would also I would also like to thank our spiritual friends that are present here at this moment with us. And let us all, taking the message and this beautiful lessons that we learned from Spiritism, let us continue working as we read in the beginning, the introduction. Let us put into practice the words that we hear, the words that we're learning in Spiritism, and let us all continue this journey with the blessings that we need for our faith and our courage to deal with all the challenges that we still have to go through. Thank you, God, for this opportunity, and so be it. All right, everyone. Again, thank you all very much for joining us. I hope you guys have a great long weekend. If you're living in a place that there is a long weekend, um, and enjoy this cozy, cold winter day. And we're gonna see each other next Sunday in person and also live at the Toronto Spirit Society. And God bless all of you, and have a great day. So be it. Thank you.